there's a lot of things happening for me this year that um, have really shown God's hand in the sense that He's moving things into place that I've been on the cards for a long time, but it's only now that it's only this year that it's really kind of coming to some kind of fulfillment. It's been like an absolutely awful year, and it's also been a very yeah, it's been a major transition for me as a Christian. Um, uh, the thing is that my testimony didn't end when I got saved. It didn't end when I had my hell experience and all that stuff. It's been a progressive thing that um, there's a lot of threads and a lot of things that excuse me that God has things I've had to commit myself to, and I can't talk about them because they're in midstream. It's just not. There's no. There's not a. It's like I'd be talking about something that is ongoing, and I don't think it's ever a good idea to broadcast things you're believing on um, when you don't know how long they're going to take, and you can't afford to have the wrong kind of people, you know, putting you off. But the point is that there's really a lot been happening for me spiritually and in my life, and as far as things that make me a very apprehensive and excited about things that I think God's going to do with me, but also about what I believe to be coming and what's going on. Now, it, God is God called me to be a pastor, and that happened a few years ago. I didn't realize how controversial that was um, until time went on. It didn't really matter anyway because I wasn't really doing it publicly. I was doing it. I just had situations and people that I was alongside that I was being pastoral with, but um, and I was it was he was confirming it and everything. I just didn't realize that the church is so institutionalized that they don't really believe in somebody being literally called by God anymore. For the most part, they don't have that. Usually, it's you've come through some kind of nepotism, or you've come through some kind of very similar background, education, everything else, and you've been vetted and screened and everything else, and you've passed the tests, and you're a clone of everybody else that is in those positions. That's the way it's done. But the idea that God calls you, like God called Abraham, or God called Jeremiah, or God called, you know, um, Isaiah, or anything like that, or God called Paul, they don't believe that. They don't see that. So anyway, that's been neither here nor there because I've been very much going through the process in quite a kind of isolated from them way. Isolated from organised church and religion and whatever. But there's always a part of you in the back of your mind you're going, how is this actually going to happen? How am I going to do this? How is this going to happen? Am I going to sort of like start going to a church and then they'll start using me, or am I going to, what's going to happen? How is this going to work? Well, this year, but there's also been an ongoing thing. And the ongoing thing has been that, like, probably like a lot of people, I'm believing that there's a move going on that God is doing, that He's breaking things off from what's come before, and He's preparing for what's to come, which is a different kind of church. Because as a church, peacetime is over, and there's a new kind of church with new kind of leaders and new kind of new kinds of um, just new believers. There's a whole different thing coming, and also there's a break off from those older churches because they've gone wrong. And I've known this, and I've known that I'm going to be part of what's coming. But for a long, long time, from my point of view, it was kind of like, how is this going to happen? This is the thing as well, right? What you'll find is when people that aren't called, I mean, everyone's called, but people that aren't called the way I'm called get extremely jealous and insecure about the idea that someone else is called. But when you're really called, like I'm called, to be honest, you don't care whether it happens or not, because it's so heavy. It's so much of a responsibility to be given. To truly be a believer, to truly believe this stuff, and God calls you and says, I'm going to give you my sheep, you better look after them. That's not what's happened to these people in other churches, because they don't care what happens to their sheep. They don't care about the sheep. They're not real shepherds. They're not being called. If they were called, they'd be terrified. You're terrified all the time. So the whole point is that there's a part of you that thinks, actually, it's be good if I'm wrong, because then I can just be a normal Christian and I don't have to, But the point is, this year, things have happened that have brought things into a kind of focus. There's been tragedy, there's been things that have brought my son, that's my remaining son, has kind of come of age because of things that have been happening. And really what's happened is that I was a little bit wandering around and started going to some other churches because I just wasn't sure what God wanted to do. But then God made it clear that He didn't really want me at those other churches. So I was still on my own. I'd come out of another church before COVID, and it didn't open up again for 2 years. By that time, I knew I wasn't going back. But the point is that my son then, who is certainly, if not anything else, appears to be an evangelist, he led two men to the Lord, in close proximity with each other, like weeks apart. And then he brought them to me, and I baptized them in the sea, and baptized them, or God baptized them, whichever you want to look at it, in the Holy Spirit. And they were born again. They got born again. And suddenly I had people I had to be responsible for because I couldn't just leave them like that. So what happened is that suddenly I had a church from nowhere. I had 3 different people. These salvations, by the way, were extremely dramatic. One of them was involved a major deliverance, and I can't even go into it. But God has given me a church with some. It's a very kind of. It's pretty out there, you know. Anyway, so suddenly I've got a church, and you're going, well, is it a church? What is it? Well, it is a church. So what happened is that we started doing church, and God started moving more powerfully than I've experienced God. Powerful at times. I think most of you, sometimes you've been in certain situations, God's been very strong in certain services or certain places or at certain times. But He's been incredibly strong in these gatherings. And these guys are completely new to this. My son's more familiar with it because he knows me and stuff like that. But he's not a churchgoer. He's not had experience in other things. And it's been so strong that you've been getting people, spontaneously delivered in the worship. Like, I mean, but delivered to an extent that they are terrified of what's happening. They can't control their own bodies as these demons are manifesting and leaving, and it's all new to them. And the guys are their gifts, the gifts which you normally take quite a while to discover. Well, have you got a gift? Or maybe you can do this. Maybe they're doing the gifts like spontaneously. They're giving words of knowledge which are absolutely couldn't they're provably, demonstrably from God, because they're saying things they couldn't possibly know. Right away, they're hearing God. So there's a lot going on in this little church, and the thing is that I was working away. I was working in a hospital car park, away from home, and this guy in this church had um, freaked out because of how powerful God was working in the situation. He didn't. It was too much, and he'd said to me, "I'm not going to come to the church anymore. I'm just going to go to a normal church." That's what he said. And I said, and I got up in the morning to this message, and I thought, and I prayed, and I said, God, I thought you just started a church. It's already fallen apart. I mean, I'm I'm finding it hard to remain feeling like I'm credible doing this. I'm believing you've started this, and he's already leaving. It's already fallen apart. Um, I got to, I'm standing there, and I'm thinking about it as we were getting ready to start working. It was cold. It was the morning. The guys were brewing up cups of tea, with a generator outside. They're standing there. These guys are just like, working, you know, working, labouring men, not remotely spiritual. And I'm sort of under my breath, I'm saying, God, what am I going to do? What is going on? You know, it's beyond my control. And one of the guys suddenly shouts out loud, like Tourette's or something. He says, I will build my church. And I'm thinking, what, what? What does he mean by? And I'm thinking, he doesn't know why he said that. This has happened to me before, by the way, this kind of thing. But he doesn't know he said that. And I'm thinking, wait a minute. That's the scripture. I will build my church and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. And I thought, of all the scriptures I could hear from God, if it was from God, that is the most profoundly relevant one in the whole Bible. And that guy just happened to say it at this moment. 20 minutes later, the guy that had told me he wasn't going to come back suddenly texts me again. I've changed my mind. I'm going to come to the church. I think I'm better with you. I want to stay with you. So there's been this thing going on, and there's been what I'd probably describe as miracles at some level happening in this group, and a very, very accelerated growth in the guys. It's been pretty incredible. And what I'm really getting to and what I feel about is that I know a lot of you are all waiting for something to happen, and you're waiting for revival, and you're waiting for this, and you're waiting for that. I believe that I'm in it. I believe I've started. It's happening. It's exactly what God has promised. It started small, but I know this is it, and I think that it's setting up now, because this is the year that was. I mean, yeah, I might be wrong, but I think next year it's like going to be a game changer. Everything's going to look different. I think that what's setting up now is being prepared for the mess that's just about to happen. And I think that these guys have been prepared to be a new kind of church. I mean, we're doing church. God's not letting me prepare anything. He's not letting me prepare. I'm not a preacher anyway, but he's not letting me prepare anything. And I'm thinking, this is a little bit like sketchy, like the whole thing. But I'm not preparing sermons or anything like that. But God is. If I preach at all with this church, 3 minutes, 2.5 minutes. But the thing is that it's gold because the guys look and they really start talking about what's being said, and then God starts speaking to them, and it's like I come away thinking, God was in that. He really was in that. It maybe wasn't like, a 45-minute preach, an hour and a half preach, but something of the Holy Spirit really done something with a little tiny message. It could just be like, say something, John 15, like the vine, you know, I might just say, so listen, you just got to stay in Jesus. If you don't stay in and the way you stay in Jesus is you read the word and you pray and you seek his face and you try you try and walk in holiness. I'll just be really basic. It will be nothing. But they'll say, yeah, because I've noticed that if I'm not really thinking about Jesus, I'm not with it, and it's not. I start feeling wrong about things. It's something like that. But it's just very. It's just all that's needed, and I suppose the main thing is that God is really turning up, like really heavy presence, and it's not just some charismania kind of whatever. Like these guys are getting convicted. They're not. They're coming in it by the end of the service. They're talking about something that's been going on that week, and they need to kind of start dealing with it. They're going. I'm feeling so wrong. I'm feeling so rotten during the thing. They want to sort of spill the beans. They want to kind of start talking. So God's really in this, and I just sort of want to encourage you that there's a lot of you that are, you know, you that truly want God, you really want it, you want the real thing, and you've come out of church because it's not church anymore, and you're wondering, am I just going to have to get through it like this? I don't think this is the end of the story. I think there's a new, excuse me, there's something new coming, and excuse me, I believe that I'm at the beginning of it. I believe that's what my calling's about. It could never have been someone out of the other system, the organised system, because they just wouldn't have seen it. They wouldn't have been put in that position. They wouldn't have known. It wouldn't just couldn't happen. It happens to me because, for the very reasons that I'm sort of rejected by them. It's not like a big game or a competition or scoring points. It just is God just couldn't do this thing without doing it with people in my position. He saved me. In a kind of, he's radicalized me. God has, in a way, and he's made me, someone who just is all about him, not about visions or projects or money or buildings or any of that stuff, but about um, raising up God's people, preparing God's people for their finest hour. You see, when the whole story ends, when it all comes to the finale of what we're going to come into, the church will have to be something it's never really been since probably the first century. It will have to be resplendent. It will have its finest hour. It will have its moment. I mean, yeah, that will probably be involved like all the martyrdoms and everything else, but there'll be the true church, which will really probably be because there'll be no middle ground. You'll either be in or out. You won't have anything to do with it unless you're absolutely, you know, for real. And I think there'll be a point that the church that Christ comes to get will be without spot or wrinkle. It's not just that he's looking for a church that's without spot or wrinkle, as if you know, maybe it will, maybe it won't. I think it's more that that's what's it's going to get to. It's in the Bible, you know. You look at the book of Daniel, you know. Many were tried to make their, I think, to make their garments white, tried and purified to make the garment. You know, we're going to go through stuff, but those of us that are truly His, are going to be resplendent by the end because of what we're going into. And these flabby churches, these lukewarm churches, aren't going to cut it. I don't know how the people there that you know that belong to God, Jesus, are going to come out of it. I don't know how it's going to work, how they're going to hear the message. But anyway, that's a long-winded way of me giving you some insight into what's happening with me. God bless.